I was scrolling through Instagram the other night and landed on this profile. You know the type. The guy is standing in front of a rented sports car, shirt open, just a little too far, talking into his phone with this intense, almost aggressive sincerity. He's a mindset coach or a crypto strategist, maybe both. He's talking about vibration, abundance, and his mission. He explains that success is just in your head and that traditional work is a trap. He's selling a lifestyle, a feeling, a shortcut. Out of curiosity, I scrolled back, way back. And under all the polished posts about projects and hustle, I found the digital artifacts, a half-finished motocross blog from 5 years ago full of posts about almost winning, a dead link to a film project, angry rants about his exes, hidden in story highlights. This man who wanted to be someone had just ended up being a guy like the other guys, not out of modesty, out of incompetence. His entire identity wasn't a person, it was a performance, a pitch. And it struck me that this guy isn't an anomaly, he's an archetype. He's the new high-definition Charo, the champion of the void. Okay, let's unpack this. We've been given a complex mission today to move past the superficial judgment of this archetype, the Charo, who in some European contexts might be called the max disservice or, universally the influencer of the void, and really understand the profound sociological and psychological currents driving men to replace authentic selfhood with perpetual performance.
Right, and just to clarify for you listening, this term Charo or max disservice, it's cultural shorthand. It's not about someone being inherently evil or anything. It's more about a person whose identity is mostly built on trying to sell this idealized version of themselves, like the enthusiastic service provider, the champion trying to make the sale.
But the product itself is...
Yeah, the product is entirely hollow. What we're looking at here isn't just like bad behavior. It's really a symptom of something much deeper, a crisis where the traditional anchors of male identity seem to have dissolved, leaving this vacuum. And the digital world is more than happy to step in and, frankly, monetize that vacuum.
And that's what we're diving into today, isn't it? Exploring the real costs of this shift, specifically how this constant chase for external validation, this self-pitching you mentioned, how it's really damaging the ability for genuine connection and maybe even more importantly, stable self-worth. It sounds like, a tragedy rooted in a societal failure.
We really need to set the scene first. Why are so many young men right now grasping for these flimsy digital identities?
Where does it start?
The core of the problem, it seems, lies in the breakdown of traditional roles, particularly that long-held expectation of the provider role.
Yeah.
Now, that expectation, it's still a huge cornerstone of masculine identity for many, but achieving it is becoming increasingly precarious.
And when we talk about economic precarity today, like right now in 2025, we're not just talking about wages going up and down. It's more fundamental. We mean insecure income, the idea of job security feeling like a myth, and the almost impossible difficulty young men face trying to afford housing. This isn't just, financial stress. It feels existential.
It absolutely is. This kind of precarity fundamentally disrupts social identities and maybe even more critically, the sense of future possibility. Think about it. If a man's self-worth was historically anchored in being that stable provider and that goal now feels perpetually out of reach, the whole structure of his identity starts to crumble. We're definitely seeing a crisis of aspiration. The old promise, go to college, get a good job, buy a house, it feels like a generational lie to many. We came across this example, a Gen X father lamenting how the traditional path just seems broken. His son ends up with $175,000 in student debt, working as a barista. There's this sense that the economic system itself has betrayed the promise of masculinity.
That feeling of betrayal, it must manifest in some profound ways. And we actually have some stark statistical evidence of this struggle, don't we?
We do.
Let's look at the education gap first. Women are graduating college at significantly higher rates than men in every single state in America. That's got to be a massive psychological blow if your identity is partly built on competence and, leading.
And then you look at mental health, which, frankly, gives us the clearest signal of the internal pressure cooker. The male suicide rate is 4 times that of women. 4 times. This isn't just a random correlation. It really highlights the incredible stress men are under when they feel like they're failing by society's metrics, but at the same time, they lack the emotional tools or permission to cope with that failure.
And something that really jumped out at me was the data on social isolation. I mean, that's fundamental for psychological health, right?
Crucial.
30 years ago, most young men said they had 6 or more close friends. 6 or more. Today, that number's been cut in half. And even more concerning, 15% of young men today report having no close friends at all. 0. That's terrifying if you're trying to build a stable identity.
Yeah, and if you're already feeling lost economically and professionally, that social isolation just pours gasoline on the fire. It contributes to severe mental health issues, even suicidal thoughts. And look at the dating statistics they show this deep social disconnection too. Nearly half of male teens have never even dated. That's double the rate of previous generations.
So if you don't have the traditional anchors work, close friends, intimate relationships, where do you even turn for validation, for a sense of self?
Well, you might turn inward, but the culture often prevents you from actually processing that pain, doesn't it?
Right.
And this feeds directly into what some call the double bind of the man box. Men are told, implicitly or explicitly, you must succeed economically to be a real man. But at the exact same time, the prevailing masculine norm hammers home this idea of ruthless independence, self-reliance, and critically emotional invulnerability. Don't show weakness, don't ask for help.
It really is a perfect storm for a masculine mental health crisis, then.
Exactly. That restrictive demand for invulnerability stops them from seeking help when they're struggling financially, emotionally, socially. So the brain, which is always seeking the quickest emotional fix to meet those fundamental needs for belonging, competence, direction, it just grabs onto whatever's available.
Like what?
Groups, ideologies, anything that provides an illusion of control and dominance. When the traditional path feels like a dead end, like a lie, men grasp onto the first thing that tells them, hey, you are special, you are in control, you belong here. Even if that thing is based entirely on emotion and, let's be frank, what some sources bluntly call performative bullshit.
Okay, so that's the vacuum. But here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. This sociological vacuum, it doesn't just exist in isolation, it's actively exploited, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
The digital world seems perfectly designed to facilitate and amplify these performative identities. It almost feels like it converts that anxiety and loneliness into a kind of revenue stream.
The internet is the perfect vessel for this. It offers instant, scalable solutions to that purpose vacuum we talked about. It takes that raw, sort of free-floating anxiety and loneliness and channels it, converting it directly into tribal loyalty and, crucially, anger. That's the engine behind the rise of the internet masculinity grift.
You see it so clearly with the extreme alpha bros obsession, right? They draw young men in with these promises of easy riches, dominance, superiority, and they frame success not as, collaboration or hard work over time, but as a constant battle, a confrontation against some vague them. The anxiety gets replaced by this superficial feeling of power and belonging to the tribe.
And it's really important to understand why this grift works so well. Often there's no real substance to the advice, zero. So everything has to be based on pure emotion. It's ironic because they often use this rhetoric about facts over snowflake feelings, but their entire model relies on exploiting emotional vulnerability.
How so?
They use aggressive, confrontational language, words like battle, win, dominate. This makes followers feel instantly part of something special, something powerful. It directly addresses that anxiety and disconnection created by the sociological vacuum.
So the very groups screaming about facts are the ones most reliant on emotional manipulation.
Precisely. The irony is, well, that's pretty thick.
And this whole mechanism is just supercharged by social media's role as a stereotype accelerator, isn't it? The platforms themselves seem built for this.
They are. They're designed to simplify, to reward catchy and short messages. This inherently oversimplifies complex social issues, including gender.
Which makes it incredibly easy to reproduce gender stereotypes, maybe even in a less restrained, more extreme way than before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Traditional media often had gatekeepers, filters. Social media largely bypasses those.
Yeah.
The most exaggerated performance, the most extreme take, often becomes the most viral one.
And that's where the algorithm comes in, creating this feedback loop.
Right. The algorithms often guide users toward more extreme content because extreme content tends to generate higher engagement, likes, shares, comments. So exaggeration, whether it's hypermachismo or, as we'll discuss, performative sensitivity, gets rewarded with those little dopamine hits of attention.
And that addiction to external attention becomes the main fuel. It pushes men further and further out onto the performative spectrum, away from anything resembling an authentic identity.
Yeah, you end up being rewarded not for who you actually are, but for how convincingly you play a caricature.
Okay, so to really grasp the extent of this crisis, we need to look at the different masks men are trying on. It sounds like there are distinct digital archetypes emerging.
That's right. We see two major, often contradictory forms of digital performance bubbling up. But interestingly, both seem to be answering the same underlying question. What does competence look like in a world where I feel fundamentally incompetent.
So on one side, you've got the hypermasculine performer. This is the guy deeply invested in that alpha, beta, sigma pseudo-hierarchy, the classic alpha male persona built on projecting macho superiority. But it often becomes a bit of a punchline, doesn't it? Why is that?
Well, because the constant need to declare your own status is probably the clearest signal of deep insecurity. Real authority, real leadership doesn't usually need to shout about itself from the rooftops.
Good point. And then there's the sigma male archetype?
Ah, yes, the sigma. Perhaps even more fascinating. He's positioned as the aloof, independent loner, often fetishized through fictional characters like Patrick Bateman, weirdly enough.
Why does that appeal?
It appeals precisely because it offers a fantasy of power outside of messy social expectations and relationships. But the content surrounding it often treads a very fine line. It blurs self-help, learn to be independent, focus on yourself, with outright misogyny. Women are frequently portrayed as mere distractions, and emotional detachment is framed as the ultimate sign of power and self-mastery.
So it's a performance designed to manage the fear of intimacy, maybe?
That seems to be a core element, yes. It's performing in vulnerability.
And tied into both of these hypermasculine types is this intense focus on physical display.
Huge focus. It's all about the gym selfies, the chiseled physiques, the extreme training routines presented as the key markers of masculine worth.
It taps into something primal, doesn't it? This ancient stereotype that a strong body equals a strong mind, strong virtue.
It does, but the irony is thick here too. This intense focus on the body as the primary marker of success is actually deeply damaging. The research shows that constantly consuming and creating this kind of idealized body content directly leads to increased body dissatisfaction among men.
How does that work?
You're using an external metric, your physical appearance, to try and generate internal self-worth. But the very nature of the digital space, the constant comparison it encourages, ensures that the goalpost is always moving. You're basically guaranteed to feel like you're falling short. It's self-defeating.
Wow. Okay, so that's one side, external strength, emotional dominance, physical perfection. But then there's this other archetype seeking validation through almost the opposite signal, curated vulnerability.
Exactly. This is the performative progressive. The soft boy, or perhaps our updated Charo 3.0.
What does that look like?
This archetype performs what we could call curated sensitivity. His cultural markers are very specific and deliberately chosen to signal his supposedly enlightened status.
So like what kind of markers?
We're talking tote bags, maybe matcha lattes, the very strategic display of feminist books sometimes humorously placed upside down or awkwardly to suggest it's all very casual intellectualism and, of course, obscure indie music tastes.
But the underlying goal is the same.
Fundamentally, yes. It's still about external validation. But here, the target audience is different. It's often aimed at the female gaze, trying to signal, hey, I'm not like those other toxic guys. I'm safe. I'm sensitive.
And this spills over into real life.
Oh, definitely. It creates these bizarre real-life situations like the performative male contests, sometimes seen in college settings. Men literally competing to demonstrate who is the most feminist, the most sensitive, the most aware.
Someone described these contests brilliantly as a kind of straight men drag show.
That's a powerful description. Acting out a feminine adjacent identity, not necessarily out of genuine self-discovery or deep political conviction, but primarily for social clout, for approval.
So whether it's the alpha, the sigma, or the soft boy.
The common denominator is the fundamental absence of authenticity. The identity isn't a person, it's a performance, it's a pitch. And this leaves them utterly terrified of genuine emotional intimacy, of responsibility, of simply being found not enough when the mask inevitably slips.
This idea of self-pitching feels really crucial here. If your whole identity is a pitch, you're essentially treating your existence like a startup constantly seeking, effective investors, emotional funding.
That's a great way to put it. You're constantly trying to secure emotional buy-in from your audience, whether that's online followers or a romantic partner. And this translates directly into how relationships are approached. It leads to what we can call relational optimization.
Meaning?
The self-pitcher doesn't approach relationships with genuine curiosity or spontaneous desire. He approaches them with metrics, with calculations. He doesn't really flirt. He calculates optimal responses. His internal monologue might sound like an emotional Excel sheet where a conversation is treated as an algorithm preliminary. Sincerity, empathy. These are replaced by consumerist jargon, by optimization language.
That story about Julian in Paris. It's such a perfect, almost painful illustration of this.
Remind us.
His partner shares something genuinely vulnerable, a fear about her career. A normal human response, or at least an empathetic one, would be support, listening. But Julian, the self-pitcher, he deflects immediately, tells her she needs to optimize her personal brand, and then, bam, pivots straight back to talking about his own gains at the gym, even checking his reflection in a window while doing it.
Wow. He literally replaced emotional support with corporate buzzwords and blatant self-absorption.
Exactly. His focus is entirely on maintaining his pitch, his image, not on the actual human being or the emotional reality of the moment.
And this obsession with potential over casual production, it also seems to define those 3 failed projects often linked to this archetype. What were they again?
Motocross, cinema, and cryptocurrency.
Right. 3 fields that are highly visible, often glamorous, but also known for incredibly high aspiration levels and, frankly, pretty low average success rates. They frequently lead to what one analysis called a suite of never-finished beginnings and almost successes.
It's the dream of being exceptional that fuels the pitch, not the actual, often grueling and unglamorous work of producing excellence.
Precisely. The self-pitcher can maintain his image by constantly showcasing these nearly successful endeavors. It aestheticizes his own mediocrity, in a way. It justifies stagnation as some kind of philosophical defiance against the system. You can always say, well, I almost made it, rather than confront the sustained effort required actually to make it.
And this deep-seated fear of being found out, of the pitch failing, that must explain the pervasive ghosting pattern we see so much, especially in dating.
It seems directly connected. The performance, the pitch is easiest to maintain when you're just selling the idea of yourself.
Yeah.
The online profile, the initial text that can be charming, witty, perfectly optimized.
But the problem hits when the relationship moves past that initial pitch phase, right?
Exactly. The analysis suggests the pitch often starts to crumble around the 3rd date. That's typically the point where genuine vulnerability might need to emerge, where emotional permanence or some level of relational responsibility starts to become expected.
And since the real self behind the performance is often terrifyingly underdeveloped because all the energy went into maintaining the facade, the charo, well, he bolts.
Strategic ghosting becomes the ultimate avoidance tactic. It's used to evade accountability, to avoid exposure. The ghoster isn't just fleeing the potential partner. Often they're fleeing the terrifying possibility of exposing their own lack of internal substance.
We even saw a quote from someone who admitted this.
Yeah, something like, it's easy when you're selling the idea of yourself. But when they want the real me, I don't even know what that is. And what if? What if it's not enough? Ghosting protects the integrity of the performance, even if it means destroying potential connection.
So we have to connect this external stuff, the performance, the pitch, to what's happening inside. This constant, desperate need for external approval seems to land us squarely in the psychological concept of relationship contingent self-esteem, or RCSE.
RCSE is absolutely critical to understanding this. It means your fundamental sense of self-worth isn't internal. It's conditional. It depends entirely on the approval, the validation you get from your romantic partner.
Which explains why the performance feels so high stakes.
Exactly. If the audience, in this case the partner, disapproves, the actor feels like they might actually cease to exist in a meaningful way. And we need to remember early adulthood, say 18 to 25, that's a really crucial phase for identity formation. Intimate relationships often become the primary source for emotional support and, well, self-construction.
So if your self-worth is contingent, totally dependent on that one specific relationship, even when things are going well, it's creating a fundamentally unstable foundation, isn't it?
That's the paradox. When the relationship is thriving, the external validation acts like potent psychological currency. When things are harmonious, the praise, the support, the appreciation is consistently provided, and crucially, it gets internalized.
And that doesn't just feel good, it actively boosts self-esteem. It leads to more confidence, better psychological well-being overall.
Right, but here's the catch. Individuals with high RCSE report feeling valuable and worthy of love, only when their partner explicitly acknowledges their efforts or accomplishments.
That only when is the key phrase there. It's the danger zone.
It really is. That sense of being fully accepted can act as a powerful emotional anchor. Yeah. It might temporarily foster a stable sense of worth, maybe insulating them from needing wider social approval for a bit. But you have to remember, this stability is completely outsourced. It's entirely dependent on an external, unpredictable factor, another person's feelings and behaviors. The individual is effectively handed over control of their self-esteem.
And that outsourced stability just shatters the moment conflict or criticism enters the picture. The fragility of RCSE seems astonishing.
It really is. Because their self-worth is so deeply intertwined with their partner's perception, any criticism isn't processed as simple feedback about behavior. It's processed as an existential threat to their entire identity.
So if a partner expresses dissatisfaction, even mildly,
The high RCSE individual perceives it as personal rejection, a fundamental invalidation of their very existence. They become hypersensitive, significantly more reactive to criticism because the stakes feel total. It's not about the dishes, it's about their right to exist.
and this leads to severe, almost immediate hits to their self-esteem.
Absolutely. It plunges them into a rapid internal crisis. We saw participants in studies reporting thoughts like, I started to question whether I was truly worthy of being loved by them. Criticism gets internalized instantly as failure, losing direction, proof of low self-worth. It can trigger a complete existential crash.
The emotional fallout must be intense.
Immediate and often catastrophic. We're talking about intense negative states, deep sadness, sharp disappointment, high anxiety, profound shame. These aren't just fleeting bad moods. They reflect significant, rapid swings in self-esteem, triggered by potentially minor shifts in the relationship dynamic. A simple suggestion for improvement can feel like proof positive that they are fundamentally unlovable.
Okay, so when that internal distress becomes unbearable, the response shifts again, right, towards coping mechanisms. And given everything we've said, these are probably often destructive.
Very often, yes. Since expressing vulnerability is typically off-limits due to those man-box constraints we discussed, and their internal foundation of self-worth is so shaky or non-existent, they have few healthy outlets. The pain either turns violently inward or gets projected outward.
Let's talk about turning inward first.
When the emotional pressure is overwhelming, it can manifest as internalized self-punishment. The abstract, terrifying nature of emotional pain gets transformed into something tangible, something physical, something that feels more manageable, paradoxically. This is the psychological driver behind many self-harm behaviors, including non-suicidal self-injury or NSSI.
The examples we saw were quite vivid, weren't they, showing how extreme this can be.
Yeah, things like feeling attacked, I intentionally hurt myself by scratching my skin, or I have hit walls or other objects just to release my emotions. Even self-neglect fits this pattern. I deliberately skipped meals all day because I felt so disappointed in myself.
It's crucial to understand the psychology there, isn't it?
Absolutely. These acts can either transform that unbearable abstract emotional pain into a physical sensation they feel they can control, or they serve as a form of self-punishment for the perceived relational failure. The body becomes the only canvas available to express and try to manage overwhelming psychological distress.
And when the pain doesn't turn inward, what are the outward responses?
We often see other maladaptive responses like stonewalling, complete social withdrawal, or sudden verbal aggression. These are all fundamentally desperate attempts to regain a sense of control and manage emotional turmoil that feels unbearable.
And this connects back to that warrior stereotype of traditional masculinity you mentioned earlier.
It certainly seems to. When this archetype feels challenged or criticized, an aggressive response aligns with that cultural script of being strong, dominant, capable of violence. We saw reports on online rhetoric that reinforces this very idea. Content suggesting men should always be ready to fight or even risk my life to protect her, framing masculinity through potential violence.
And sometimes it gets darker.
Yeah, sometimes even joking about using violence against women, seemingly without consequence. This kind of rhetoric reinforces a hierarchical, aggressive vision of masculinity. It implicitly suggests violence is an appropriate, maybe even necessary tool to maintain perceived male superiority when challenged. That's the really dark underbelly of performing dominance.
So the digital age just pours fuel on this fire, doesn't it? Turbocharging the need for external validation. It seems like it can sometimes completely override the need for actual authentic love.
It really can. It pushes individuals towards these, frankly, coercive public performances. The underlying need for validation is so primal, so strong, that its absence feels like active rejection or neglect. It results in these intense feelings of worthlessness and anxiety.
So if the private, genuine emotional validation isn't that maybe because the relationship itself is suffering because of all the performance, what happens?
The RCSE individual often resorts to what we might call dysfunctional compensatory strategies. The sources term these alternative emotional economy strategies. Basically, they try desperately to fill the void.
How?
By attempting to control the public perception of the relationship to prop up their fragile self-worth, even if the private reality is completely empty.
This leads to things like demanding public displays of affection or respect.
Exactly. That startling example we saw. I force my partner to treat me well in front of his friends, even though behind the scenes he often doesn't care. Think about the profound shift in priorities there. The need to appear loved can completely overshadow the need to actually feel authentically loved and connected. This is especially true when someone's self-worth relies entirely on those public metrics, the follower count, the likes, the perceived admiration of peers.
The performance literally becomes the relationship.
It does, and it creates this devastating negative feedback loop. The cycle of dependency and coercive behavior demanding public displays ironically erodes the very possibility of real intimacy and trust. The strategies used to fill the emotional void end up digging the hole deeper, worsening the genuine connection and perpetuating the psychological distress. The underlying crisis of self-worth just keeps churning.
So the ultimate, almost heartbreaking irony of this whole Charo archetype, it seems to be that in his desperate attempt to escape the confines of the traditional, maybe restrictive workhorse male role, the guy who just works tirelessly for stability, he ends up circling right back and reinforcing older, arguably more toxic stereotypes.
It's a deep irony, isn't it? He tries to reject the perceived limitations of the establishment, but in doing so, he often reverts to a very brittle, very showy, and ultimately quite traditional form of masculinity.
Why does that happen?
Well, partly because ideas about masculinity are so often constructed through this rigid binary, this hierarchy of opposites, us versus them. If women are stereotyped as dependent, then men must be independent. If women are weak, men must be the protectors, the warriors.
And the Charo's rhetoric, whether he's pitching crypto, mindset coaching, or alpha status, it frequently boils down to economic masculinity, doesn't it?
Very often, yes. His entire performance hinges on the conspicuous display of economic capital, or the promise of it, the rented sports cars, the talk of big money, the self-help guru status, claiming secret knowledge to wealth. This performance implicitly reinforces the age-old idea that male strength, dominance, and power are primarily derived from economic success. And the flip side of that coin often depicts women as needing protection or being dependent on that male success.
So he tries to look modern and free, but his actual metrics for success are deeply traditional and sometimes pretty misogynistic.
Exactly. And ultimately, the core problem, the knot at the center of both the Charo archetype and the high RCSE male, is this fundamental inability to tolerate self-doubt, to tolerate emotional intimacy. Vulnerability feels like death.
Which leads them to constantly, relentlessly pitch this idealized, impenetrable, perfect self.
And cultivating genuine resilience requires the opposite. It requires men challenging those restrictive masculine norms that forbid asking for help. It means collectively redefining success beyond just economic provision. And most crucially, it means fostering intrinsic self-worth, a sense of value that isn't entirely dependent on a partner's fluctuating approval or the fickle validation of a follower count. They have to somehow move from selling the idea of themselves to being okay with the messy, complex, imperfect reality of who they actually are. It feels like the only real escape route from the void.
So what we've really explored today is, I think, the complex tragedy of this modern male performance. It seems to start from a very real place, a crisis of direction, economic uncertainty, genuine anxieties. Yet the attempt to solve it through digital posturing, through chasing external validation, it only seems to amplify the psychological volatility. The Charo, the influencer of the void, he's desperately trying to project this image of strength, complete with the rented Lamborghinis and the pseudo-philosophical jargon. But underneath it all, his entire foundation of self-worth is revealed to be incredibly fragile, totally conditioned, and utterly contingent on the very audience he often seeks to dominate or impress.
Yeah, we really see that self-pitch as the ultimate defense mechanism against a pervasive feeling of inadequacy. It's this constant, exhausting attempt to demonstrate worthiness in a world that no longer offers clear, reliable pathways to feeling valued. But the price is incredibly high. It leads to a profound lack of genuine emotional connection, an inability to accept criticism as anything other than a fundamental attack, and sometimes, frighteningly, the manifestation of that internal pain as self-directed violence or these coercive demands within relationships.
That initial story of the digital Charo, the guy who wanted to be someone but ended up being just a guy like the other guys, not out of modesty but out of incompetence, it really resonates now, doesn't it? His identity truly isn't a person, it's just a performance, it's only a pitch.
And perhaps the real crisis isn't just that men are performing for women or performing for other men online. It might be that they have perfected the art of the self-pitch so completely, so relentlessly, that when the curtain finally drops, when the audience leaves and they are finally alone, they discover the truly terrifying truth. They have become nothing more than an audience for their own empty lives.